Welcome, Westminster Canterbury. I hope you're doing well and enjoying. We're actually now into the Christmas season. And of course, you know, not only where you are, but all through this city and in our country, we are all dealing with Christmas and COVID at the same time. And so we want the Christmas spirit to really infect all of us and to realize that we are all, life is a gift, and we have this gift. One of the people that remind us of that is Charles Schulz, and that's the person we're going to be talking about during this lecture today. But I wanted to say that if any of you want to email me, I would really appreciate the email, and I have made a slide just with, I have two emails, I actually have more, but two that you can email me. Fraser at vwu.edu, and then bensonfraser3@gmail.com. So either one of those, if you have questions or anything like that that you want to ask about these lectures, then I would be happy to hear from you, and we'll respond in a timely way. So I hope you're all staying safe and trying to enjoy this beautiful Christmas season. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Charles Schulz. Now, we want to talk, the main thing about him is how faith helped shape his work. And, okay, so who is Charles Schulz? Well, he's you all know him. He's the creator of Peanuts, the comic strip. But some of the things you may not know is that he won a Pulitzer Prize. Well, he didn't win it, but he was a Pulitzer Prize nominee. He did win an Emmy, which is, you know, the television award for one of the best shows in its particular category. And it won a Peabody Award, which is named after George Peabody, and that's another television award. And then he won, he was given the Congressional Gold Medal, which for a citizen of the United States, one of the two highest medals you can win. So, you know, you don't think about a comic strip artist doing that, but he was a pretty important person in many ways. And we're going to hopefully learn some of that today, and then mainly focus in on his religious work and his Christmas work. That would be it. So in 2020, 20 years, that's this year, after his death, Charles Schulz is still the third top earning deceased celebrity. So he reached this celebrity status, trailing only Dr. Seuss and Michael Jackson. Now, you all heard of all those people. Last year, 20 years after his death, he died in 2000, he made $32.5 million from his comic strips and books and videos and television specials and movies and all those different paraphernalia that come along with that. So he's still doing really well. Dr. Seuss, who we're going to be talking about next week, by the way, next Friday is our last Christmas special. We're going to talk about Dr. Seuss, and he beat him out by $500,000. So Dr. Seuss made 33 last year. Michael Jackson made more than both of them. And some of you want to know, Elvis was fifth on the list. I'm always interested in that. Okay, Charles Schulz was born November 26, 1922 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he died February 12th, 2000 in Santa Rosa, California. Interesting thing is that a few weeks before he died, he finally said, you know what, I can't do this anymore. He had cancer, and his sickness was affecting his work. And so he finished the ones that he was working on and stopped drawing the cartoons. There's just a few days, couple, 2-3 weeks, whatever, before he finished. His last cartoon, original cartoon, came out on the day he died. And so he went to bed, died in his sleep, and that was between a Saturday and Sunday, and the Sunday he passed on, I guess, in his bed. Anyone that was close to him called him Sparky, and we'll hear a little bit more about how he got that name. And You know, in some ways, he changed even the language of our culture. The whole idea of good grief, everybody knows, associated with Good Grief, Charlie Brown, or security blanket. That came from Linus. You know, you always see him. He can't ever. There's hardly ever a scene without Linus and his security blanket. Now, I want to give us a little background on Charles Schulz, and to do that, I want to play a couple portions of an interview with him. The interview is a lot longer. It's 33, 34 minutes, but this is just two segments of about 5 minutes each. But it gives you the flavor and and you can see him actually talking. And he's interviewed by Charlie Rose, and so I'd like you to watch this couple clips of the interview, about 5 or 10 minutes of that, I guess it is. Okay?
For nearly half a century, some 50 years, Charles Sparky Schulz has brought us the agony and the ecstasy of the Peanuts gang. It debuted in 1950 in only 7 papers. It now appears in 2,600 newspapers around the world with 300 million readers. The most successful comic strip in history has inspired 4 feature films, a long-running Broadway musical, and some 40 television specials. These days, Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and the rest of the gang can be seen on everything from blimps to coffee mugs, and I am pleased to have Sparky right here with us at this table. Welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
People still call you Sparky?
Well, I hope so. If you hear anybody ever call me Charlie or Charles, then you know that they really don't know me.
Yeah.
I was named after Barney Google's horse the day after I was born.
Yeah.
That was the most popular comic strip of its day, and I am told that an uncle whom I didn't meet for 25 years visited my mother and me and looked down and said, by golly, we're going to call him Sparkplug. And I've been called Sparky ever since.
Yeah. Now, your dad was a barber.
My dad was a barber.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you'd get your hair cut, and then if somebody else came in, you'd have to sort of get out of the chair quickly. And
that was always embarrassing because he'd say, you know, this is a good customer come in, and so I'd have to sit on the bench with a half a haircut. And it was so embarrassing to sit there with a half a haircut.
And what influence did your mom have on you?
My mother and I had a wonderful relationship. I remember her saying once, you know, I'm getting so I don't trust anybody anymore. I don't believe anybody. She says, the only person that I believe is Sparky. I believe everything he says. And my dad would say, don't you believe me? And she said, no, I don't even believe you. She was a nice person, but she died, unfortunately, from a terrible, lingering death of cancer at the age of 48, which is much too young.
Oh, boy,
and
sure is.
You know, I grieve over that many, many times.
In fact, you tell an incredibly important story. You were about to go off into the service, and you went back to visit her, and she knew. She knew that would be the last time, and you better say your goodbyes.
That's right. The night that I had to report back to Fort Snelling in Minnesota, she said, I think we should say goodbye because we will probably never see each other again. And off I went, and next thing I knew, well, she had died. And I don't know how I ever survived those days. It's a long time ago, but those are some things that you just never forget.
There is about you 2 things that I've noticed in knowing a little bit about your life. One, the enormous success you have, but still an element of insecurity or an absence of certainty.
Oh, yes. I just drew a Sunday page before we came in where Charlie Brown is saying, I don't like to be happy. I'm afraid to be happy because
yes.
Lucy, who is in the psychiatric booth, says, well, why should you be afraid to be happy? He says, well, every time you get too happy, then something bad happens. And so she says, well, you're sitting there now. Are you happy? He says, well, yeah, I guess I'm happy. And then he falls off the chair, clunk, you know, which I think proves the point.
You are Charlie Brown.
Probably, or maybe 60%.
60% of Charlie Brown is you.
I think so.
And 40% is your imagination of composites of other people and things.
All of the characters, most of them are named after friends of mine. And I had a wonderful friend named Charlie Brown. He and I worked at the correspondence school in Minneapolis for many years, as did Frida and Linus and other people like that. Yeah. It's kind of nice to use names of friends of yours.
Yeah. And did they like it?
Oh, yes. Charlie Brown had a wonderful time. He even came to New York here and was on one of those I think it was Tell the Truth or something,
Yeah.
and he fooled everybody.
I know. I once appeared on Jeopardy as the answer to a Jeopardy question, and nobody got it right. And I thought, well, that's nothing to be proud of. They couldn't get your name.
I was on that one night, and they had a whole list of things, and there's one of them I couldn't answer.
Let me ask the other part of the question. Is that you seem to care more. You still love the doing of it. You haven't let go of any of it. There's no corporation making these cartoons.
That's right. I am what my one daughter, Amy, described as she came into my studio one day and asked me something, and she said, "Dad, you're obsessed." And to me, if I have to describe it in one word, I would say that is it. But I draw comic strips for the same person or the same reason that some people do watercolors or play the piano or do something like that. It's the one thing that I think I know how to do, and I think I'm proud of being a comic strip artist. I think along with jazz, it's the one pure American art form, although they don't consider us artists, you know. We're downgraded considerably. We're not considered worthy of art galleries and things, but that's all right.
But you feel that you should be. Because it's an American art form.
Yeah,
because
it is kind of insulting when you see a huge white canvas with a black streak going through it. And I remember looking at the Metropolitan ones and seeing paintings like that, and I thought, well, maybe what I do isn't so bad after all. But then I went upstairs and I saw the Monets and the Picassos, and I thought, well, maybe what I do isn't so good after all.
that'll do it for you. But didn't you put together the television special in a rather remarkable amount of time, 4 or 5 days or something?
Even less than that, just sitting in a living room. I can remember talking with Bill Melendez and Lee Mendelson, and I think the key to it was that we sat there trying to put together this show, and I said, you know, the more we think about it, we cannot do this show without including the famous passage from St. Luke. And that had never been done before either. No one would ever put biblical passages in an animated show. Yeah. And we did it, and of course when Linus walks out onto the stage and says, "Lights, please," and there were shepherds, you know, in the field. That was the highlight of the show.
Yeah, and they did a big, as I said, about a 48 share, which stunned everybody. I mean, it was a great success. They immediately ordered 4 more.
Yeah.
And you knew you had another thing to do.
We did Halloween, and we did Valentine's Day.
Does the money mean a lot to you?
I never think about it. I don't even know how much I get. I never see the
Well, you
checks.
know how much they talk about. I mean, there's you know,
can't believe that.
$50 million a year.
The syndicate
and all that
takes
stuff.
half of it, you know.
Yeah, come on. It doesn't. You don't do all the things you could do. I mean, with the kind of money you make, you could have anything. You could live anywhere. You could do anything. You live in Santa Rosa, California, and you draw every day. That's what you do.
Yeah.
Because that's what makes you happy.
I won't say that I never
Play golf.
did it without knowing that you could make money. Now, let me say that when I was about 16 or 17, I was sitting in my dad's barber chair one day, and I was reading Life magazine that had an article about Frank King, the creator of Gasoline Alley. And it said, Frank King makes $1,000 a week. And I said to my dad, see, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make $1,000 a week. That's the only time, I think, in all my life that money has ever been mentioned. But there's nothing wrong with that.
No. And your golf game, you said it's perfect, but it's not perfect. How well do you play golf?
Well, I used to be pretty good, but...
a scratch golfer?
Almost. I won the Caddy Championship years ago. It's the last thing I ever won. But I've played with some good players. You know, I've played with Johnny Miller and people like that, which is a real treat. Right now I'm up to about a 13, which is kind of disgraceful, but I'm old.
Yeah.
Yeah, very old.
Do you worry about mortality?
I worry about everything.
Yeah, I know you do. I'm sorry. You're the one person I know it's true.
I don't see...
And from that worry comes all these characters.
That's right.
Talk about the characters for me, each one of them. Snoopy.
Snoopy, I think a lot of us forget that it's difficult to be a dog. Ever see a man walking down the street and he's got a golden retriever on the leash, and you ever think that that poor golden retriever is saying, what am I doing here? You know, is this going to be my whole life, walking around the street with this guy on a leash? You know, it's a miserable life. So Snoopy has to retreat into these fantasies, I think, to make his life bearable. Although he's got a good master who treats him well. Lucy is the sarcastic part of me. She relieves all of the sarcastic things that I might say. I'm trying to learn not to do that. Schroeder, of course, is restricted to playing the piano. Linus, I think, could carry a comic strip all by himself. He's a good character, very well-rounded.
Have you ever thought about spinning him off?
I think it's a bad idea. I really think that it's more important to have the entire keyboard to play upon so you don't keep striking the same notes all the time. I have a repertory company of probably 15 characters, and if I can't think of anything for Charlie Brown, I can always turn to Peppermint Patty or Marcy or something, and I think this is very important.
I go through life. Everything I see, I think about it as a possible show idea.
Mm-hmm.
Every experience, everything I read, I say, that would be great to do a program. That's a fascinating person to interview. Do you look at everything you see and have it sort of come through your mind?
Definitely.
As fodder for what you do creatively?
Definitely, and I have discovered that anything that I do, whether it's playing golf or tennis or hockey or going to a symphony, it must be the activity that gets your brain moving, and I can almost guarantee myself that I will think of something funny while I'm listening to the symphony or playing tennis or hockey or something. It's just the way my mind works.
Funny.
Yeah, I think funny. I don't look funny, so people say, well, where do you get all the ideas? How can anybody who looks as dumb as you do ever think it's something funny? But if you'll pardon the expression, excuse me, I think I'm reasonably witty. I think of funny things all the time. It just comes natural. In fact, all of the things that you see in the strip, if you were to read it every day and study it, you would know me. Those are things that I say all the time. It just comes natural to me.
To read your script,
Mm-hmm.
to read your characters, is to know you.
That's right. Isn't that depressing?
All right, so hopefully that gives you a little sense of the man. He comes across, at least to me, as being just a wonderful, gentle, humble man, a man who apparently worries a lot, who maybe is a little depressed and hopeful at the same time, and a bit insecure. But you wouldn't think of him as that. But nevertheless, when he comes across in an interview like this, he seems to be, but more than anything else, just a great, humble person. The other thing that's clear is that he puts himself into these characters and into this script. So if you read the script, he says, you know me. You know, at one point, I don't know if it was here or somewhere else I read it or saw it, is that he says he's like Charlie Brown. He's 60% Charlie Brown. So if you read Charlie Brown, you sort of know Charlie Brown. You sort of know Schulz as well. And so what I want to do is not talk about all the characters in his script, although all of them have a little bit of him in there and a little bit of someone else. But I want to talk about some of the two things, some of the religious aspects, and also I want to talk about the Christmas special, because it's the Christmas season with the Christmas story, and so we want to see that. There's some books out on this, actually, and at the end of this PowerPoint, the end of this lecture, I'll bring up some literature, some articles, and some books that you can look at to further read in this area. But one that I have right here that I wanted to mention is The Gospel According to Peanuts by Robert Short. And Robert Short actually spoke here a few years ago in Virginia Beach, and I went to see him. And this is the old Robert Short book that I got years and years ago, but there's a new one that came out, and so he was on one of these tours where a new book comes out, and so I bought the new book and he signed it. When I was leaving, I couldn't find the new book, but I did find the old book, so here it is. But The Gospel According to Peanuts, and it's great. It's just a really short, brief book with a lot of good cartoons in it. And then because we're talking about Christmas, you may be interested in the Christmas season, and he has a book that came out, I think it came out in 2000, the same year that he passed, 50 years of Peanuts. The Joy of Peanuts Christmas, 50-year holiday comics. Anyway, so those are just two, and there are more, and I'll either mention them or I will, at the end, you'll have them. Now, Jonathan Merritt wrote a wonderful, wonderful article. In fact, a lot of what I have to say I got really out of him and his article in The Atlantic. And 2016, he wrote this article. And he says, Schulz revolutionized the industry by using his script to subtly raise religious questions about the Bible, prayer, the nature of God, and the end of the world. So all those things were found in his comic strips. And by the way, when I'm talking, go ahead and read the comic strips. They'll tell you more than anything else. And I love this one that he wrote about Charlie Brown and Snoopy, where it says, look what I've got for you for Christmas. A bowl, look what I got you for Christmas. A bowl of chocolate chip cookies. And Snoopy goes, wow. And then Charlie Brown's walking away. He says, I hope he doesn't eat them all at once. And Snoopy's throwing the thing away and saying, what did he say? But that's very typical. I mean, it's the kind of thing that you and I, could do, except I don't like chocolate chip, but I don't like chocolate, but most people do. And so they would do that. And so at one time, Schulz was devoted a devoted Christian. And he looked careful, and if we look carefully, we can see his fingerprints of his faith in the comic strip of Peanuts. And that's the kind of thing that I want to unpack for us today. Now, Merritt, in this book, in his article in The Atlantic, says, by mixing Snoopy with spirituality, he made his readers laugh while by inviting them into the depth of conversation uncommon on the funny pages or in comic strips. And so we see in this very unusual method of communicating things that are very purposeful and serious. Now, many familiar with Peanut strips don't think as Charles Schulz as a Christian pioneer. But the author of, who was it? Stephen Lind, the author of A Charlie Brown Religion, exploring the spiritual life and works of Charles M. Schulz, says this, but he was a leader in American media when it comes to both strength and frequency of religious references. They are there in his comics. More than 560 of Schulz's nearly 17,800 Peanut newspaper strips contained religious, spiritual, or theological references. Now that doesn't seem like a lot. I did the math and it was a little over 3%, between 3 and 4%. But if you put it this way, all of us probably remember the strip, and I have a picture of it here, of Lucy moving the ball from the football from Charlie Brown when he goes to kick it. And it says here, to put this into perspective, Schulz only reproduced 61 strips featuring the famous scene where Lucy pulls the ball away from Charlie Brown as he tries to kick it. So only 61 out of that 17,800. And here it is, we see him having over 560 that deal with religious themes. And of course, preeminent among those themes in many ways is that of Christmas. What's interesting is frequently pastors would like some of his comments so much that they would ask permission, and he usually always gave it, to copy the comic strip and use it in their sermon or in their bulletin or that sort of thing. Now, I'd like to talk about the Christmas show. And so that's key, and many of us remember it. I imagine many of you, as I do, remembering seeing it on CBS. And by the way, it started on CBS, and later on ABC bought the rights to it, and so they got it. So if you see ABC sometimes and CBS started it and the others. So let's just look at the show first and just get a sense of it, because Schulz's most recognizable reference to religion occurs when Charlie Brown Holiday Special exploring the true meaning of Christmas. What is that true meaning of Christmas? Let's look at it.
You've been dumb before, Charlie Brown, but this time you really did it. What a treat!
I guess you were right, Linus. I shouldn't have picked this little tree. Everything I do turns into a disaster. I guess I really don't know what Christmas is all about. Isn't there anyone who knows what Christmas is all about?
Sure, Charlie Brown. I can tell you what Christmas is all about. Lights, please. And there were in the same country shepherds, abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them. And the glory of the Lord shone round about them. And they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, Fear not. For behold, I bring you tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host praising God, and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. That's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown. Behold, I bring you tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you.
Linus is right. I won't let all this commercialism ruin my Christmas.
Okay, so I'm not under any illusion. All of you have seen this. I'm absolutely fairly certain. I guess I'm not absolutely and fairly. I'm either fairly certain, let's say fairly, maybe not absolutely certain, that most all of you, if not all of you, have seen that before, probably many, many times. You know, it still holds up. It's a great sort of thing. And Schulz, realizing that the holiday's secular trappings did not form the essence of Christmas, he had Linus read this story coming from Luke 2, 8 through 14. And at the time that this went on the air in the 60s, there was less than 9% of Christmas episodes or specials contained religious references. Can you imagine that? And then at Charles Schulz's insistence, and this was actually, the network really pushed back on him on this and didn't really want him to put a quote from the scripture in there, especially that long, the Charlie Brown Christmas special, but he insisted that the reading from the King James Bible, King James of all the versions too, that more traditional version of Luke, but anyway, they protested, but he still won out, and they included, and it ended up being just the core of that episode. It was the second highest show that week, and it sparked a number of other Peanut TV shows, as you well know. Now, guess what I'm getting at here is that there is a theological side to Peanuts. Schulz was not a hellfire and damnation variety that you might expect that you find in some fundamentalist churches or some evangelical churches some places. He did not attempt to shame skeptics or to level judgments or state that he had any particular axe to grind. In fact, he said he didn't have any axe to grind. Schulz was also no evangelist, nor did he make any effort to convert the non-believer. But what he did instead, as a cartoonist, was just to let who he was and his ideas and beliefs leak out into his comic strips. You can grind out daily gags, he said, but I am not interested in simply doing gags. In other words, his strip. Schulz would say, I am interested in doing a strip that says something and makes some comment on the importance of life. Now, to underscore this last statement that I just made, that he wanted to say something meaningful, and he was trying to, I want us to go back and just look, and this is a real brief clip, but just as a young man, still young and starting out, what he had to say about his comic strips and what he was doing.
Charlie Brown's a pretty miserable critter altogether, isn't he? I mean, not much nice happens.
I think Charlie Brown is just a little bit of what all of us have inside of us. Mainly me. Mainly I'm Charlie Brown.
You really think that?
Oh, undoubtedly. If you draw about people that win all of the time, you are drawing only about the minority. Most of us lose, you know. Most of us have ambitions. We like to win golf trophies or tennis trophies or things like this, but most of us never win them.
Well, what about the other characters that move around Charlie? Are these other characters from your memories, too?
Some of them are. Some of them are memories only in name only. Schroeder, for instance, was a young fellow with whom I used to caddy in St. Paul, Minnesota. The new character that we have, named Frida, is named after a friend of ours in Minneapolis. Lucy, you could say, represents the domineering female, but is not necessarily female. She merely represents the fact that little girls seemingly mature faster than little boys. And also all of the kids in the strip represent the cruelty of children one to another. And of course Charlie Brown is the one who takes most of the beating. But you'll find this in any neighborhood. Don't you remember in your days?
What about the famous little fellow Linus and his blanket?
Well, from what I have observed, not only from my own family, but from all of the people we know, and especially from people that have written to us, there's hardly a family alive that does not have some child in it who has a blanket. And Linus, of course, represents this. He also represents more than this because he represents the adults trying to get rid of certain bad habits and the tremendous troubles that they have trying to get rid of some of the things that they don't want to do.
Now we're getting to it, because up to now it seems to me you've been saying that you're actually drawing kids as kids, but you're doing more than this.
Well, I hope so. Mainly the thing is to try to be funny every morning or every evening, according to whichever paper runs the strip. But there has to be some sort of a message. Anybody that says they can do humor without a message is doing awfully weak humor. This is a sore point with a lot of cartoonists and a lot of editors. Some people would like to have you do humor that does not carry too much of a message for fear of offending somebody. But humor without a message, as I say, is very weak humor. So the message here is the message of the insecurity of all of us and the trials that we all have and this sort of thing.
Okay, so my point in showing you that clip, besides just, it's sort of good to see what he looked like, you know, and how he started out and that sort of thing, but to show you that he was intentional in what he was trying to do. He was trying to make a serious statement. He wasn't just writing about children or creating cartoons about children. He was very interested that using that voice of cartoons and childhood to talk about serious adult things that you and I could deal with, and that in fact he was dealing with many of these things. Now, Schulz converted to Christianity shortly after returning from the deployment in World War II. And he was, and the experience sparked the love inside him for sacred literature. So he became a Christian, and he really wasn't just a passive sort of observer. He really went in and studied and read commentaries and those kinds of things. He began a voracious reader of the theological commentaries, and the margins of his personal Bible were filled with handwritten notes. So he's somebody that really just really took seriously his faith, at least at that time. He was a longtime Sunday school teacher at the churches that he attended in the Midwest and then later in California, even leading one group through a study of the entire Old Testament. So wasn't just a passive Christian. So it's no accident that the Bible and theological and those kinds of things found their way into his cartoons. This may be why many of the religious references in Peanuts were drawn directly from sacred scripture. In Exodus, we see, in the Bible, reference was found in Exodus. When he catches Snoopy, and this is one of the cartoons, and I have the cartoon there for you to look at, he catches Snoopy taking food out of the refrigerator. So Snoopy, the dog, is going in and swiping food. And he says, "Hey, what are you doing? You can't just take things out of the refrigerator. Look, it says here in Exodus, you shall not steal." And so Snoopy takes the book and reads it and turns a few pages and hands it to him. And he says, in Deuteronomy 25:4, it says, "Thou shalt not muzzle the ox while treading the grain." And of course, you know that it says that as well. And then Charlie Brown says, "I don't see any treading out any grain." And he says, "It got me out at the back door." So here we see that he got to incorporate that scriptural text, two of them, within that one cartoon, and it kind of just created a really humorous moment. What is happening here is we're really seeing an indirect style of communication. He wasn't in your face. He always had a little twinkle in his eye, a little wink, a little humor. But often they were very cryptic statements. Lioness asked Snoopy, "Does it bother you that the Bible doesn't speak highly of dogs?" And the beagle replies with a reference to one of Jesus' teachings, "Sure, it bothers me, but I just turned the other muzzle," and any of us would know that you turn the other cheek is how the Bible would reference that. And maybe today everybody doesn't realize it, but certainly in those at that time in the 60s, people understood that. In the famous strip from 1959, Linus builds a sandcastle that the rain washes away, and Linus concludes, "There must be a message learned in here, but I don't know what it is." But many of the readers, of course, understood what it was, because there is the scripture in Matthew 7 that talks about the man who builds his house upon the sand. And Schulz later said that's exactly what he was thinking of and exactly what it means. So Schultz's willingness to include his faith in his works cuts against the grain of his era. The creator of Blondie, you might remember that, Chai Young, reportedly warned that mid-20th century illustrators to avoid religious topics and themes in their work. But going against that grain, Schulz said, "No, let's go ahead and include that." And he dared to include that in his comics. Now, Schulz in 1966 said, just the mere fact of quoting from the Bible, of course, for a long while, forbidding in comic strips, was being forbidden in comic strips, because somehow they just didn't want you to get near these areas. Schultz's bravery, in other words, he opened the floodgates, and other cartoonists soon picked up their pen and shared their spiritual thoughts as well. Schulz was criticized by some devout believers, making religious reference with just in a lowly thing as a comic strip didn't seem right to him. But as a comic strip may be perhaps the perfect place for Schulz to raise his spiritual and religious questions. As one writer put it, when the readers come to the end of the panel, in other words, the comic strips are usually for Schulz 4 panels, there's a gap not only between the rectangles but also the action contained in each. And the reader must then fill in what is happening, creating a sense of mental closure so that the episode makes sense to the reader. And so what we see happening here is that the reader fills in this narrative leap between the scenes. And that's really particular to cartooning, but actually there is a narrative leap in many times of art. And so they have to make that narrative leap to help them create and get their idea across. This was exaggerated in Peanut Strip, which tended to have an excessive amount of white space throughout, and sometimes very little action in the different cartoons. Additionally, these pint-sized characters were able to raise adult questions in a disarming way. You wouldn't expect these characters are all children. He didn't draw adults, he drew children. And yet these children were raising very important issues that many people of his readers and viewers would also be asking. The result that the reader became a participant in the script's conversation instead of merely a spectator. Now, you wouldn't think it, but it was true. Prayer was one of the main themes in many of the religious cartoons that Schulz did. When he had Lioness ask, "Do you pray, Lucy?" Schulz was nudging the reader to reflect on their own prayer habits. Schulz penned 40 different scripts addressed to prayer alone. When Charlie Brown confessed to Lucy, "Sometimes I wonder if God is pleased with me," Schulz was tapping into a common stirring among many who live good life, even that even a perfect God would deem laudable. So the more you read sometimes, and the more ideas that are set before you like that, the more we begin to think about those topics. In a way, he sets the agenda not to determine how we're going to think, but to determine what we will think about. And that was happening here in these comic strips. Given the success of Peanuts, at its peak, was read by 355 million people in 21 different languages and across 75 countries. It's incredible. It's quantifying the impact that Schulz had in religious content. It'd be very, very difficult. How many conversations around the water cooler or dinner tables during the last half of the 20th century were shaped by Schulz? How many these comics were taped to cubicles or put on the side of a refrigerator that encouraged spiritual encouragement? How often did that happen? And so he was kind of getting us to think about spiritual things through this very innocuous way, and challenged us to think about things that maybe in other types of media were not even allowing us to or encouraging us to think about. Now, to be sure and to be fair, Schulz had questions. Late in his life, Schulz began to refer to himself as a secular humanist, as his theology became less traditional. Now, this did not mean that he was no longer a Christian. I think he still thought of himself as a secular humanist who believed in Christian thought, but rather that he now believed that other faiths might also provide a legitimate path to God. He was also less certain about other Christian doctrines. One, for instance, was heaven literal. The more Schulz wrestled with his faith, the more he led his readers to do the same. In 1985 strip, Sally asked Charlie Brown, "When we die, will we go to heaven?" Charlie responded, I like to think so. This mixture of hope and skepticism reflects Schulz's own evolving faith, which came to assume an increasingly central role in his work. If you look at a map of religious references in Peanuts over time, the trend line rose up as it moved to the right. And so what it's saying is that later in his life, he began to reference more questions and religious issues that seemed important to him. Now, he can be, as we've learned, he thought of himself much like Charlie Brown. He thought of himself many times as insecure, a worrier, as many of us are today. We worry a lot. He thought of himself also as hopeful. So he's that contradiction of terms, someone who could be depressed and hopeful at the same time. And he was insecure. And of course, as we go into this Christmas season, he understood that. He understood all that emotional influence is heightened and raised at a Christmas time, as it is, I'm sure, for many of us who are listening to this lecture. I want us to see one last video. And this one is about 10 minutes, and it's very, very interesting. It goes over some of the things you said and adds some new things. But this is talks about the Charlie Brown Christmas. And it has something to say about Christmas and depression. And as you know, a lot of people get depressed at Christmas time. Even in the best of years, and this has not been the best of years, we often get depressed at this time. And so we need to think about that sort of thing and begin to handle it. And this is a beautiful way in which Charles Schulz has us think about Christmas and depression, those things together. So let's watch this video together, and then I'll finish
Christmas
up.
time can be a simultaneously brutal and beautiful season for many. A time to celebrate what we have been blessed to have, and also reflect on everything we've lost. A holiday to be surrounded by those we love, or realize how alone we feel. Few stories capture that dichotomy and the melancholy it creates better than a Charlie Brown Christmas. This first ever animated adaptation of Charles Schulz's Peanuts stories has endured and inspired countless generations of viewers since it first aired on December 9, 1965 on CBS. Which came from a last-minute request by the network and sponsor Coca-Cola for a Christmas special starring Charlie Brown. But author Charles Schulz was hit with a lightning bolt of inspiration. The story of little Charlie Brown, depressed and directionless as Christmas approaches, is filled with charming animation, lovely acting, and an exquisite score. But the biggest reason for the continued success and relevance of A Charlie Brown Christmas may be the relatable sorrow and angst of Charlie himself, as well as the messages of comfort and care shown to the many who feel lost and alone during the holiday season. It seems as if everyone has watched A Charlie Brown Christmas, so let's keep the synopsis brief. Charlie Brown ponders his life as Christmas approaches and grapples with an escalating depression.
Rats.
While his friends half-heartedly try to cheer him up, Lucy recruits Charlie to be the director of an upcoming Christmas play to give him purpose in hopes of brightening his spirits. But he's faced head-on with the commercialization of the season, which only fuels his depression and frustration. Like most Peanuts stories, Linus is one of the few people who can see what Charlie is going through and stands by his friend despite many setbacks. But the rest of the cast of characters can barely see outside themselves. When dealing with depression, it's easy for someone to feel increasingly disconnected from the world around him or her. This only grows worse when friends and family fail to understand these struggles. A bright, cheery, and shallow holiday season is the perfect storm for someone like Charlie Brown. Most everyone around Chuck is obsessed with money, presents, and the showy nature of a commercial Christmas. Even good-hearted Snoopy is preoccupied with winning a decoration contest. Its flyer drives the point home.
What's this? Find the true meaning of Christmas? When money, money, money. Spectacular, super colossal, neighborhood Christmas lights and display contest. Lights and display contest? Oh no!
In a world with adults rarely heard and never seen, It's no surprise that the commercialization of the holiday season has taken hold of the child characters we see. Charlie Brown's sister, Sally, outlines her materialistic take on Christmas with her letter to Santa Claus, dictated to our hero.
Please note the size and color of each item, and send as many as possible. If it seems too complicated, make it easy on yourself. Just send money. How about 10s and 20s?
10s and 20s? Oh, even my baby sister.
All I want is what I have coming to me. All I want is my fair share.
Charlie seems lost, overwhelmed by the wants of others and unable to keep up with the haphazard demands of his friends in the Christmas play, who consistently point out his failings. Charlie himself faces rejection and discusses his feelings out loud, while everyone around him seems to be consistently happy. The disconnect he feels between his personal problems and the seeming joy of everyone else only highlights the difficulties he faces on his own. Beyond the themes of the special, the visual and musical choices made by Schulz, along with executive producer Lee Mendelson and director Bill Melendez, reinforce this quietly sad approach to the holidays. The pace of A Charlie Brown Christmas is a major aspect of its gloomy feel. While it may partially be a reflection of the style at the time, the way the story takes its time in unfolding a simple narrative helps it from rushing past crucial emotions. By staying in the moments of melancholy, an audience sits with these feelings instead of being distracted by a fast-moving plot. The backgrounds are muted, with icy blues and whites covering the outdoors. Snowflakes dance and fall throughout many of the scenes, adding a beautiful chill to these moments. Inside, the houses in the auditorium are warm and bright, but the feeling is undercut by the difficulties being faced. The placement of Christmas during the coldest and darkest time of the year was no mistake. Dating back many centuries, Christmas and the pagan traditions it replaced were meant to provide comfort and joy in stark contrast to the surrounding gloom. The animation here places emphasis on that bleak darkness. These visual choices and sense of pacing are as much a product of this time in animation as they are the deliberate decisions of the team behind the television special. While the pace and tone of most holiday specials and cartoons in general have only quickened and brightened in the decades since, the lovely coalescence of theme and style within this first Peanuts special has helped to keep its messages and storytelling relevant throughout the years. On the auditory side of the technical process, Vince Guaraldi's iconic score is an unforgettable counterbalance to the often forcefully cheerful nature of classic holiday songs. This is Charlie's story, with his point of view informing the narrative structure. This means that his feelings should inform the feelings of the special as a whole, and Guaraldi's score is the direct connection between the emotions of the character and the tone of scenes overall. Guaraldi's jazz adaptations of classic Christmas tunes and brand new songs are the oral expression of how depression can create a filter through which even the most joyous occasions can become bleak, suffocating experiences. Quality of production aside, A Charlie Brown Christmas speaks to viewers because it is intently focused on providing positive and simple comforts to its central character and anyone who may find themselves in similar times of grief. There's nothing wrong with being happy during the holidays and wanting others to feel that joy too. But those interactions and the ability to reach out to others who may be nearby but feel a world apart require empathy. What lacks empathy? Cheap, hollow commercialism, which is what stands in the starkest contrast to Charlie's depression and furthers his sadness. Charlie's search for a Christmas tree for his holiday play is really the encapsulation of these many themes. Lucy and the rest of the kids want a giant aluminum tree, aluminum trees being a fad at the time the special was made. But Charlie finds the smallest, most spindly little tree in the lot, a rejection of the fakeness of the holiday in favor of something genuine, no matter how pathetic it may seem. Of course, Charlie also wants to feel like he matters, and that's exactly what the little tree gives to him.
I don't care. We'll decorate it, and it'll be just right for our play. Besides, I think it needs me.
But Charlie's choice doesn't go over well with the rest of the kids, and their criticisms only serve to further alienate him. From the multicolored aluminum trees to the wild dancing kids to flashing lights on Snoopy's doghouse, the brightness of the season feels fake and wearisome when seen through the eyes of someone grappling with depression. Ultimately, this leads to a moment of peace and reconciliation that is the entire reason for this holiday special's narrative. When Charlie exclaims and asks if anyone knows the true meaning of Christmas, Linus literally takes center stage, reciting the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verses 8 through 14.
And there were in the same country shepherds, abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them. And the glory of the Lord shone round about them. And they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, Fear not. For behold, I bring you tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host praising God, and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men.
It was a bold move back then, and it seems even bolder now, with the message of the Bible put front and center in the tale. It was Peanuts author Charles Schulz who insisted that it be part of the story, even when network executives balked at the idea. But Schulz's Christian themes were already in place within his comic strips and were his biggest reason for telling this tale. While it's inherently impossible to separate the story of the birth of Christ from Christmas itself, the central idea of A Charlie Brown Christmas is a plea to the goodness in people of all faiths. Christmas is peace. Christmas is a time of goodwill. Christmas is meant for us to show each other that we care. But it's not just one day a year where we should bless one another in such a way. If we're called to do so at the darkest, most depressing time of all, what more can we do for each other when the sun is shining and the world is warm? The recentering speech of Linus and his declarations of love and togetherness help Charlie find a moment of peace beneath the starry night. While depression may be a crippling disorder, it doesn't take away the goodness within people. Charlie tries his best, but he can't truly recover alone. Depression and loneliness require comfort and connection.
Oh, everything I touch gets ruined.
The Peanuts kids have quietly pursued Charlie out into the night, having obviously been moved by the verses. As seen in his moment of dropping his security blanket during his speech and later using it to support Charlie's tree, Linus has also moved away from his fears to better show compassion to others. That compassion comes from the group in the form of making Charlie's tree as beautiful to everyone as it is to their friend, capping off their display of affection by singing Hark the Herald Angels Sing in the night. That final image of pure joy that's found in coming together for the sake of others is the culmination of the Christmas season and what it means to show goodwill toward one another. While a person's struggles with depression may never fully end, a helping hand and an expression of love can guide us through our darkest moments.
Okay, so I think we all are a little bit like Charlie Brown. We all at times feel insecure and maybe depressed. We wrestle with our emotions and sometimes isolation. And yet we have against that, and we're in a very difficult year, no doubt about it. But against that we have the good news. We have friends who have empathy with us. We have the knowledge that after winter comes spring, and that life will not always keep us so isolated. This is a wonderful time. There is the good news of God's love and faithfulness that came through even these comic strips. And I wish for you a wonderful Christmas, and that you'll experience the love and the joy of your friends, even if you can only do it and family, sometimes only on Zoom, as that will happen with me, because I'm staying isolated. And that we know that after that, we'll be able to enjoy our friendships more. At any rate, have a good week. We look forward to seeing you next week for our final one on Friday, and then of course on Tuesday. And also I have put up for you the 2 emails that you can email me if you have any comments or thoughts or bfraser at vwu.edu or bensonfraser3 at gmail.com. So either one of those. Have a good day. Bye-bye.